What's your top-down view of India's private banking sector as it stands today? I think the foreign banks have kind of ceded some amount of ground compared to when we were 20 years ago and the 21st century was starting. Because of the sheer, sorry, if I just look at the private banking side, you just got ICICI Bank, HDFC, and Axis. That's it. Do you think next 20 years from here, how do you see things shaping out? Can anyone probably challenge their domination, or how do you see things going forward?
So if I look at the private sector banking today, clearly there are some very, best way to call them is class players. They're very high quality players in the private banking system, and in at least if I get my counting right, in about 25 years or less, they have provided a very attractive alternate to the PSU banking system. I feel that, if I look at the private banks' dominance today, firstly, they deservedly now account for 1/3 of the pan-India banking share. But if I look at the dominant private banks today, I think them being challenged in the first 10 years is near impossible. In 20 years at best, maybe. And I can explain why I have a slightly different view over tenor. I think if you look at any regulated entity or regulated industry like banking, it takes a long time to build and compete with dominant players. And while you are doing that, the dominant players continue to grow rapidly based on their excellent franchise, their reputation, etc. So there's always a lag and lead in the catch-up. However, over 20 years, a lot could happen. And the things that come to mind, for instance, are there could be regulatory relaxation in terms of allowing business houses or private equity firms or international banks to be majority owners of domestic banks. That could be one changing landscape in banking, and that could sort of alter the positionings and the rankings of banks. The second thing is, the debt capital markets in India are still very shallow.
Really?
And if they were ever to match the depth we have in the equity markets over time, which is the intention and the hope, then clearly a lot of the banking business could move away from the banks to the capital markets. I think that could be one possibility. Technology so far, in fact, there's a lot written about technology being disruptive, etc. But in reality, on the ground, technology today has served as a facilitator to banking for reach, for cost, for convenience, etc. However, it can't be ruled out that in the long run it does become a disruptor. There is AI, there's so many things coming, so we will have to, at least at the back of the mind, that's a possibility.
Yeah.
And the last thing which I'm most certain is also going to happen is, because the green shoots are already there, is there was a very big asset class of fixed deposits in banks. I think that is going to give way to the equity market. I think we're going to see a shift. We're already seeing it in the way the SIPs are being subscribed, etc. So I think a combination or some permutation of these kind of factors, if they play out in the next 5, 7, 3, 4, 5, whatever number of years, then over a 20-year period, there could be a change in the ranking pattern that we see today.
What do you think about the fintech disruptors? आजकल के बच्चे कुछ भी मतलब कर रहे हैं just because they've got lots of capital from abroad, whereas the way that we build businesses in India used to be very different.
So
anyway, but
actually,
what do you...
fintech, if you look at it, hasn't been a disruptor. It has reached out to a segment the banks were choosing not to or were unable to for cost reasons. So I think it has, increased the size of the cake. But not necessarily taken it all away from the banks. And now with the new regulations, etc., they have to now run it through a regulated entity, etc. So, that's why regulation does. Yeah. In a regulated entity, it is always going to be a little more challenging to be a clear disruptor. But I do feel that over time, also as people's appetite for convenience and for not ever wanting to visit a bank, which is the case with our children, not wanting to write a check, etc., becomes more sort of mainstay, then I think we will see we will see technology probably more disruptive than it is today.